Good morning, children. Sairam. I again welcome you all to the online class of economics. Children, today I am going to start the next chapter of our book, Indian Economic Development. That is chapter number 6, and the name of our chapter is Economic Reform since 1991, or it is also known as New Economic Policy. Children, this is the first video of this chapter, and in this video we are going to learn the meaning of economic reforms, the element of new economic policies, and an appraisal of LPG policies, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization policy. So children, let us start with the first topic, that is meaning of economic reforms and new economic policy. Children, as we all know, since country's independence, India followed the mixed economic system by combining the advantages of the market economic system, that is the capitalist economy, with those of the planned economic system, that is socialist economy. But in the reality, the public sector dominated the control and regulation of our economy, and private sectors was ignored. There was a huge investment in the public sector and very low investment in the private sector. The dominance of the public sector was for about 4 decades, which led to establishment of various rules and regulations, the laws, and which hampered the process of economic growth and development. So children, there are certain reasons behind this economic reforms. As we all know, the economic condition of India in the year 1991 was very miserable. It was due to the cumulative effect of a number of reasons, and some of the various reasons I'm going to point it out, which make you understand that why there is a need of the new economic policies in the country. Children, the first one is the poor performance. First one is the poor performance of public sector. This is the first reasons behind of starting up the new economic policies. Children, as we all know, in the 40 years period, like from the year 1951 to 1990, the public sector was assigned an important role to work for the economic development of the country. However, except a few public enterprises, the overall performance was very disappointing. I mean, if we're talking about for all, then there was some public enterprises that was good, but apart of it, there are many public enterprises whose overall performance was very worst and disappointing. So considering the huge losses which is incurred by a good number of public sectors enterprises, the government recognized the need of making necessary reforms. Now the second reasons behind is the deficit in the balance of payment. Children, a deficit in the balance of payment arises, when the foreign payment for imports exceeds the foreign receipts from exports. So that was also the reason of this new economic reforms to be taken up. Next is, children, inflationary pressures. Next one is yours, inflationary pressures. Children, as you all know, there was a consistently rise in the general price level in the economy due to increase in the money supply and shortage of essential goods. So this was the reason behind of economic reforms. Next is fall in foreign exchange reserves. Fall in foreign exchange reserves. Children, as you all know that in the year 1991, foreign exchange reserve fell to the lowest level, and it led to the foreign exchange crisis in the country, and therefore the foreign exchange reserve declined to a level that was not even adequate to finance the imports for more than the 2 weeks and to pay off the interest that needs to be paid to the international leaders as well as the lenders of money. Next is the huge burden of debts, inefficient management. These are some of the basic reasons for the economic reforms. Children, as we all know, economic reforms refers to a set of economic policies which is directed to accelerate the pace of the growth and the development. Therefore, in the year 1991, the Government of India initiated a series of economic reforms to pull the economy out of the crisis of 1990s. So these reforms came to be known as the new economic policies, and the broad components of new economic policies are first uh, like uh, first is like liberalization, the policy of liberalization, liberalisation, that is liberalization. So the policy of liberalization is taken in place of licensing for the industries and trade. So the licensing policy has been replaced by the liberalization. Then the policy of the privatization, that is P, is taken in place of quotas for the industrialist. Previously there are so many quotas, so many reserve there for the industries. So therefore this you can say restrictions will be replaced by the privatization. And next is the policy of globalization, that is G, in place of permits for export and import. Therefore, the policy LPG, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization, has replaced LQP, that is licensing, quota and permits, in the year July 1991. So the new economic policies was announced in the year July 1991, and it consisted of a wide range of economic reforms. And the main aim of the policy, this economic policy, was to create a more competitive environment in the economy and remove the barriers to entry and growth of the firms. Therefore, the new economic policies can be broadly categorized in the two kinds of measures. The first one is stabilization measures, and the second one is structural reforms measures. So, children, the stabilization measures refers to the short-term measures which aim at correcting the weaknesses of the balance of payment by maintaining the sufficient foreign exchange reserves and controlling inflation by keeping the rising price under control. Now, the second one is the structural reform measures, which refers to the long term measures which aim at improving the efficiency of the economy, increasing international competitiveness by removing the rigidness in the various segments of the India's economy. So, children, the economic reforms were being taken by the government in July 1991. Now, the next question arises, the elements of the new economic policies I mean the three core element, the three broad pillars of the new economic policies. The first one is yours liberalization, second one is privatization, the third one is globalization. So children, let us start first a topic, what is liberalization. Children, prior to the 1991, there was a large number of government restrictions in India in the area of licensing, import and export, trade, dealing in the foreign exchange, etc. In July 1991, a package of reform, the economic reforms was announced, which marked the beginning of process of liberalization in India. Therefore, liberalization means removal of entry and growth restrictions on the private sector, and liberalization involves deregulation and reduction of the government controls and greater freedom of private investments to make economy more competitive. So basically under this process, children, the business is given free hands and is allowed to run on commercial lines. So children, this is the liberalization, or in short we can say that liberalization of the economy means freedom of the producing units from the direct or the physical control imposed by the government. So there are some observations which can be supported in this regard. The first says that prior to the 1991, the government has imposed several type of controls on the private enterprises in the domestic economy, as we know. So this include the industrial licensing system, the price control, of financial control on goods, import license, foreign exchange control, restrictions on investment by the big business houses. Second is it was experienced and by the government that several shortcomings has emerged in the economy on account of these controls. So, children, these are basically the liberalization, and in the views of the above points, we can say that liberalization of the economy was considered a key element of new economic policies. A greater reliance was to be placed on the market forces of demand and supply rather than check and control. And many developing countries like the Korea, Thailand, Singapore, they have achieved the highest growth due to liberalization, which were considered as a great path of competitive growth and development. So, children, the purpose of, as I just said, of liberalization was to unlock the economic potential of the country by encouraging the private sectors and multinational corporations to invest and expand. So, some of the economic reforms that would have taken under the liberalization can be understood as follows. So, children, all the various reforms that would be taken in the liberalization can be classified into the four basic categories. In the first category, we are going to learn the industrial reforms, the industrial sectors reforms. So, children, in the industrial sector reforms, the government has implied liberalizations, usually deregulation of the industrial sectors of the economy, and and under this regard there are certain points which can support in this new economic policy as well. The first one is abolition of the industrial licensing. Children, as we all know, in the July 1991, a new economic policies was announced. That is the new economic policies, and it abolished the requirement of license except for the following five countries, that is liquor, cigarette, defense equipments, industrial explosive and dangerous chemicals. Children, as we know that in before July 1991, for any industries, there are certain restrictions, and there are certain restrictions, and they have to follow the certain uh, uh, rules and regulations in this regard. As we all know, if any industries need to expand their business, or if they want to import or export from any foreign countries, or if they wanted to increase their capital or the fixed stocks, fixed assets of the business, then they have to take the license for doing so. And for private sectors, there are a lot of restrictions in giving the licensing. So you can say that previously there was a licensing systems which was abolished in the year July 99, and a part of this five basic industries, that is liquor, cigarette, defense equipments, industries, explosiveness, and the dangerous chemicals, there is always there will be no restriction for the next industries, a part of this industries. I mean, the licensing is still compulsory for this five industries, but a part of this five industries, there all the various licensing restrictions was abolished. Second one is the contraction of the public sectors. Children, under the new economic policies, the number of the industries reserved for the private sectors was reduced from 17 to 8. In the IPR resolution 1956, we have already understood that the industries were classified into the three categories. In Schedule A, there was private sector enterprises, in where the 17 industries were reserved. So in the July 1991, there was a reduction in the total number of the private sector of the public sectors. Previously, it was 17 public sectors industries which was reserved as a public enterprises. Now it is reduced from 17 to 8 only. And in further regards, we can say that in the year 2010 to 11, the number of these industries were reduced mainly only two. The first one is atomic energy and the railways. Now the next one is the de-reservation of the production areas. Children, as we all know, the many production areas which were earlier were reserved for SSI were de-reserved. Forces of the market were announced to determine the allocation of resources rather than the directive policy of the government. Children, in the previous times, like after the country's independence, just to promote or just to save and protect the small scale industries, there are certain quotas reserved for the various industries. And now all this the small scale industries were de-reserved. Now anyone can make a production with any kind of services. Next is the expansion of the production capacities. So earlier, children, the production capacities were linked with the licensing. Now there was a freedom from the licensing implied the freedom from the capacity constraint. Earlier, there was a restriction that what to be produced and for how much quantity we can maximum produce. But if you want to increase more, then we need a production, we need a licensing. So now all this capacity constraint, the licensing implies the freedom from all these restrictions, and what to produce and how much to produce was now a matter of production of the what to produce and how to produce was now a matter of producer's choice, which is depending on the market conditions. Next is freedom of import capital goods. As I just said earlier, there was a restriction that we cannot import or export any goods from the foreign countries, or we cannot export for the desired level. So now all the restrictions were abolished, and liberalization also implied freedom of the industries to import capital goods with the view of upgrading the technology. Now, no permission was longer required from the government to enter into any international agreements of the import of the technology. So, this was the industrial reforms taken out in this regard. Now, the next one is financial sector reforms. Children, in financial sector reforms, it basically includes the banking and the non-banking financial institutions, the stock exchange market, and the foreign exchange market in this reforms. And in India, the financial sectors are basically regulated and controlled by the RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India, which is known as a central bank. So, liberalization implied a substantial shift in the role of RBI from the regulator to a facilitator of the finance sector. As a regulator, the RBI, which is prior to liberalization, would itself fix the interest rate. Now, fix the interest rate for the commercial bank, but as a facilitator, I mean, after the countries, you can say after the countries, after the liberalization policies, the RBI would only facilitate the free play of market forces and leave it to the commercial bank to decide the interest rate structure. So now competition rules the decision making process. Next is fiscal reforms. Fiscal reforms relate to the revenue and expenditure of the government, and the tax reforms are the principal components of the fiscal reforms, as we all know. Tax reforms refers to the reforms in the government taxation and the public expenditure policies, which are collectively known as its a fiscal policy. Children, as you all know, the tax may be of two types. The first one is your direct taxes, and the second is the indirect taxes. Direct taxes consist of a taxes on the income of individual as well as the profit of the business enterprises. Like we need to pay the income tax, the corporate tax, wealth tax, service tax to the government. And in the same way, the indirect taxes refers to those taxes which affects the income and the property of a person through their consumption expenditure. And indirect taxes are generally imposed on goods and services, that is like we are paying the GST. So this kind of taxes is known as the indirect taxes. Now children, we are moving on to our next topic, that is privatization. Now children, privatization, what does the privatization means? Children, privatization means transfer of ownership. It means the transfer of ownership, management, and control of public sector enterprise to the entrepreneurs in the private sector. So, children, privatization implies the greater role of the private sectors in the government activities of the country. And over the years, children, Indian government has diluted its stake in several public enterprises, including the IPCL, IBP, Maruti Udyog, etc. And privatization can be done basically in the two ways. The first one is, as I just said, transfer of ownership and management of the public sector companies from the government to the private sector, and privatization of the public sector undertakings, that is PSU, by selling of part of the equity of PSUs to the public. So this process is basically known as the disinvestment. So the purpose of the privatization was mainly to improve the financial discipline and facilitate modernization, and it was also believed that the private capital and the managerial capacities will help in improving performance of the public sector undertakings. So therefore, privatization means a process of involving the private sector in the ownership and operation of the state-owned enterprises. So, children, now the next question arises: why we are need of the privatization? Children, as we all know, the need of the privatization was felt basically of the poor performance of the public sector undertakings, and for under this regard we can understand that the policy of industries were initiated during the second five-year plan assigned a key role to public sector undertakings. The industrial policy resolution 1956, which is clearly and categorically state the significance of the public sector undertakings in the process of growth and development. And you all know that most public sector undertakings, the enterprises, turn into a social dead weight, that is the social liability which is mounting losses of public sector undertakings, which becomes unsustainable. Leakage, pilferage, inefficiency and corruption had become so rampant in the public sector undertakings that their privatization was considered as the only remedy. So, accordingly, in the year 1991, the government decided to phase out the public sectors by selling its equity to the private entrepreneurs, and privatization was to be replaced the public ownership of the large number of enterprises. And in this one, the Navratna were, the nine jewels, the industries were to be retained as the public sector enterprises, and indeed the government decided to upgrade their functional freedom with a view to enhances their competitive strength. And all these nine jewels or the Navratna industries can be named as: first, the Indian oil. The first one is Indian oil, Bharat Petroleum, then ONGC, then SAIL, Steel Authority of India Limited, then BHEL, next is IPCL, Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited, VSNL, and at last we have NTPC. Last one is HP, the Hindustan Petroleum. So these are the nine industries that are basically such profit making companies which are compared with the nine countries in the court of King Vikramaditya, who were the men of eminence and raised wisdom. So these nine industries are basically the Indian Oil Corporation, Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, next is ONGC, that is Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, SAIL, that is Steel Authority of India Limited, BHEL, that is Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, IPCL, that is Indian Petrochemicals Corporation Limited, VSNL, Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited, NTPC, National Thermal Power Corporation, and HPCL, Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited. So these are the nine industries which reserve for as a public sector enterprises. Next, we are on the topic where we are going to learn the gains as well as the losses of this privatization. Children, as we all know, the privatization implies the supremacy of the self-interest over over the social interest. So while self-interest prevails, the entrepreneurs work with 100% commitment and efficiency becomes the condition of survival for the workers, and higher productivity is the obvious results. The second one is privatization. Expect the private enterprises to work in the competitive environment. So both domestically as well as in international, the competition induces upgradation and the modernization. So this was the essential condition of the growth and development of the privatization sectors. And the next is the privatization promote diversification of production. So you can see that there are many MNCs, the multinational corporations are a testimony to the fact that the private sector enterprises are capable of redefining the benchmark of the growth. And the last is that the privatization promotes the consumer's sovereignty. Higher degree of consumer sovereignty implies the wide choice and better quality of life. Children, we do have some losses of the privatization. The first is the socialistic pattern of the society is left to survive only a theoretical possibility. So it loses its practical relevance. Only the public sector undertakings are sold off to the private entrepreneurs. Means we are talking basically about the socialistic pattern of the society, but it was left to the free hands and the theoretical basis. We cannot find a socialistic welfare in the economy in our society. So it loses its practical relevance when only the public sector undertakings are sold off to the private entrepreneurs. The last one is the privatization encourages the free play of market forces, but in the process the goods are produced only for those who have the mean to buy them. So when the prices rises, which is obviously the tendency in the free play of market forces, because anyhow the prices of the commodities can be increased or decreased depends upon the market conditions. So the weaker sections of the society suffers deprivation. So, in this, you have understood a Silsila tragedy was notable evidence in this regards. So, children, these are basically the positive as well as the negative aspect of the privatization. So, children, in today's video, we have understood the need of the new economic policies. I mean, the reasons why the economic reforms can be taken. We do have learned that what is the economic reforms and what is the various economic reforms taken in the July 1991, which is basically known as the new economic policies. And previously it was and basically it was reduced by the new structure of the economic development. Previously, it was a licensing which was replaced by the liberalization. Previously, in place of quotas, there are now the government has initiated privatization in the public sectors, and the permit was now been replaced by the globalizations. Thereafter, we have learned the industrial reforms, the fiscal reforms, as well as the external reforms taken out in the liberalization. Next, we have learned the privatizations, the need of the privatization in the economy, the positive, the merits and demerits of privatizations. So that we have learned in this video. And children, in the next video we are going to cover up the the remaining topics of this chapter. So, children, thank you so much for watching and have a nice day and Sai Ram.